Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today, we are learning Maseches Makkos Daf Ches, and we're starting at the words Lema Kitanoi, the last few words, the last line, I should say, of the narrow lines on Zion Amud Beis. Yesterday, we had discussed an odd case scenario that if I was going up a ladder and I stepped on a rung and the rung broke, and that I was walking up. But as I stepped down on the rung broke and it fell and killed someone. How do we view that? So here the Gemara says on the bottom of Zion Amud Beis, one line before the wide lines, it says Lema Ketanoi. We possibly have a machlokes tanaim about this. What is the machlokes tanaim? So the Gemara says as follows. We see here that there's a machlokes tanaim about if I'm climbing a ladder and the leg slips from the rung breaks and kills someone, as to whether or not I'm chayiv. So the Gemara says, "My love, bakimiflagizm is what we're talking about. The mar savar yeridahi, umar savar aliyahi. That perhaps the machlokes is that the downward step of my foot is considered a yerida, and we know that based on the pasuk we learned yesterday of Vayapel, that one will be chayav for downward motion. Therefore, we would say that one is going to go to galus for that. Umar savar aliyahi, and therefore you don't go to galus. Says the Gemara, lo, that's not correct. The kule alma aliyahi. Everyone agrees that you're going upwards. Bilokasha, kan lenizakin, kan legalus. One is only talking about nazikin. It's not even talking, it's just damages. It's not talking about galus at all. So one's talking about galus and one's talking about damages. That's possibly another distinction between the two shitas and the Tanoim. And as well, by saying galus, really everyone agrees that we're talking about galus. Bilokasha, hadi islia and hadi lo islia. One's talking about a piece of wood that's very wormy. A tolas is a worm. And if the wood is very wormy, then when I step on that wood, it will bow a little bit. It's not standing perfectly static. When I put my foot down, it bows a little bit. So that was the Yerida. And therefore, you should have known at that point to stop and be more careful. That's what it means if it's the isli. And hadelo isli, if it's not wormy wood and the wood is very strong and it can hold my weight, so then shalom yisrael, that I didn't do anything wrong and I would be pater from galus. Me by same a last possible final recommendation before we get to our next Mishnah is Abba hadelo isliya. Really, the wood has its integrity to it. We're good to go. One is if the wood is very tightly put in place, and one is where it is not very tightly put in place. So these are all of the various possibilities of how to understand the machlokes tanoim around stepping on a rung of a ladder and that rung of a ladder falling. There's a pasuk in Sefer Shoftim that speaks about v'nashal habarzel min ha'etz, that if the metal, if the head of the axe, the sharp part, flies out from the handle and then it kills someone, what the halacha is. So we're going to see here a discussion about that in the machlokes tanaim, just basic pshat, how we understand the pasuk. So it says the Gemara, nishmat habarzel mikito. Let's say that a person has the metal fly off the handle, viharag, and it kills someone. So, okay, so I take my axe and I'm swinging it to hit a piece of wood that's below me, right here. And as I'm throwing, I get to this point, and the head of the axe goes flying off into the distance, and it accidentally kills somebody. Rabbi Omer Gola, Rabbi says that's considered. Rabbi Omer Eino Gola. Rabbi says that there's no galus in this case, which is fascinating, because how then does he understand the pasuk in Chumash? V'nashal habarzal min ha'etz v'umatzahu v'meis. So how does he understand that? So we'll learn that in a minute. He says no galus. V'chachamim omrim gola. Now, here's another possible machlokes. The first one was if the axe head falls off of the handle. Here's a different one. The axe head doesn't fall off the handle. You hit the tree with your axe, and says the Gemara, min ha'etz hamispakeya. Someone gets killed. You hit the tree with the axe, boom, and then a piece of wood flies off, and that piece of wood goes off and kills somebody. In that case, Rebbe says, Omer Gola, that's where there's a Gola. That's where you go to Golas. That's considered an accidental murder. The Chachamim Omer Meino Gola. The Chachamim say that's not a case of Golas. Tanya, let's see a brisa that really does align with our Mishnah to help explain to us what's going on with our Mishnah. The Gemara says as follows. Tanya, the brisa says, Amar lahem Rebbe lechachamim. Rebbe says to the Chachamim, V'chinemar v'nashal habarzel me'etzel. Does it say that the axe head fell off of its handle, its own wood? No, it doesn't say that. V'halo lo nemar ela min ha'etz, v'nashal habarzel min ha'etz. So that means that he understands the pasuk is saying that when the pasuk says "V'nashal habarzel min ha'etz," that the axe head fell off the wood, it doesn't actually mean that. It means that the axe had caused wood to fly off and kill someone. That explains Rebbe in both cases in our Mishnah. Rebbe doesn't assume that when you're throwing the axe down and the head falls off that you go to Gullus. He said Eino Gola in that case. And he also said that when you're hitting the tree and a piece of wood flies off, you are chayiv in that case. That second case is exactly plunk what the pasuk is talking about according to Rebbe. Because he says the pasuk's not talking about the axe head falling off the handle, but rather the wood that the axe head causes to fly off of the tree. The Odin furthermore says the Gemara, Rebbe's already given one argument that when we talk about our pasuk, that the pasuk is not talking about the axe head falling off of the handle, but rather the axe head is on the handle and it hits a tree and the wood goes off and kills someone. What's his second argument? The Od says the Gemara, 4 lines, 5 lines from the bottom. Namar eitz lamata v'namar eitz lamala, ma'etz amar lamala min ha'etz hamispakea, avetz amar lamata min ha'etz hamispakea. Gzer shava. We have two different psukim, and one's talking about wood that splinters off. So too, we're also talking about wood that splinters off, and therefore that's how Rebbe understands. However, this really does cause a bit of a problem with the Shita of Rebbe because of the following. Amar Reb Chia bar Ashi, Amar Rav. Reb Chia bar Ashi says in the name of Rav, V'shnehem mikra echad darshu. Both Rebbe and the Chachamim of our Mishnah, they learn from the same exact pasuk, V'nashal habarzel min ha'etz. And here's what the Gemara says. Rebbe savar yesh aim lemasores v'nishel ksiv. How would we have read the Torah without vowels? So I wouldn't have done this because I don't know what I'm talking about. But according to the Gemara, Rebbe would have read the word v'nashal, which has no vowels, as v'nishel ksiv. And some of the Meforshim explain that had it been that it was to say v'nashal, then it would have said vav nun aleph shin lamed v'nashal. But without the aleph there, then it's v'nishel, meaning he feel that item caused something else to happen. So therefore, Rebbe learns the pasuk that it's v'nishel. He learns yesh em l'masores, that when you take that act, it's v'nishel. It caused something else to happen. So that's why he learns the way that he does, because he says really yesh em l'masores, the way that the word should read. Not Yeshem Lemikra, but Yeshem Lemasoras. So the Gemara therefore says that that's how he reads it. However, the Rabbanan Sabre Yeshem Lemikra. The Rabbanan say no, we don't care how we would have read it without vowels. We care how halachically we have to read it, and the halacha is that we have to read it in the frame of v'noshal, and just like we read it. So on the very last line of Zayin Amid Beis, the Gemara says, Rabbanan Sabri Yeshem Lemikra, they hold that we follow how we read it on Shabbos and Leaning, v'noshal karinan bei. So that's how they understand the pasuk, and it's just fascinating the depth of the machlokes of yesh aim lemasores v'yesh aim lemikra. And the Gemara says that the reason why in our Mishnah that Rebbe didn't want to learn the pasuk in Sefer Dvarim and Parshas Shoftim Kipshuto, that the axe head fell off of the handle, it's because he holds of yesh aim lemasores. When you see the word v'noshal, we read it v'noshal, but he saw v'nishel. It's not how we would read it in laning. Even Rebbe would agree with that. But we have to darshan based on the masoras, and therefore he holds that we can't be talking about the axe head falling off of the handle, but rather the piece of wood that the axe head causes to jut off to the side and accidentally kill someone. And that's why Rebbe holds the two shitas that he holds in our Mishnah. Asks the Gemara the last few words on the page on Zayin and Beis. The Rebbe yesh aim lemasoras svirulei. Rebbe doesn't hold the yesh aim lemasoras. The whole argument of Rebbe that we just learned over the last few lines and in this Mishnah is predicated on the fact that Rebbe holds of yesh aim lemasoras, that we follow how the word would have been read without the nekudos that the Chachamim put into place. So why is it that we think that Rebbe doesn't hold of yesh aim lemasoras? Because if you turn to the top of Daf Ches Amud Aleph, which is really today's blot, and in Yirtzeh Hashem, we will get to the 2 dots toward the bottom of Ches Amud Beis. But says the Gemara, it just can't be that Rebbe holds that way because Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, these are Amoraim. And what do they say about the following Tanoim? Rebbe, who's our contact, that's who we're talking about now, Rabbi Huda ben Roetz, Ube Shammai, Virib Shimon, Virebbe Akiva, Hulu Svirulu Yesh Ein Lemikra. The whole argument of Rabbi Huda Hanasi, of Rebbe, was Yeshem Lemasores, and we don't read the pasuk V'nashal. I mean, we do read it that way, but we darshan based on V'nishal that the axe caused something else to happen. So, but that we just pulled the carpet out from under him because now we're seeing with Female that as our Gemara quotes in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, who quotes in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that Rebbe does not hold of Yeshem Lemasores, he holds Yeshem Lemikra. So says the Gemara, you're 100% right. Hainu de ka'amar lehu ve'od. That's why the Gemara presented a second argument for Rebbe on the bottom of the previous page. First, we gave the argument of Yesh Aim lemasores, and then we added ve'od, that we had the Gzeir Shava of eights. And that way we're able to cover all of our bases. So even if you want to say Rebbe doesn't hold of Yesh Aim lemasores, it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, we have our ve'od, we have our Gzeir Shava. And our machlokas between Rebbe and the Chachamim is maintained. And it's, again, just to review our Mishnah, it's a double machlokas. The double machlokas is, if the axe head falls off of the handle while I'm swinging it, Rebbe says, no galus, the Chachamim say galus. And if I take an axe and it doesn't fall off the head, and I hit a tree and a piece of wood juts off the tree and kills somebody, Rebbe says that's pshat in the pasuk because yesh ein lemasoros, or because of the Gzeir Shava of eight, and therefore Rebbe would hold that in such a case you're chayav galus, whereas the Chachamim would not. The Gemara on Ches Amud Aleph now speaks about a connected issue, which is how many steps away am I from the accidental murder? So here's what the Gemara says: Amar Papa, man deshoda pisa ledikla. Let's say I take a clod of earth or a rock or something, and I throw it at a palm tree. The atar tamre, and dates then fall off. The azul tamre v'katil, and then the dates fall and they kill somebody. So it's indirect, right? I throw something at the tree shakes, a cluster of dates fall, and they kill somebody. It says the Gemara, Banu lemachlokes to Rebbe v'Rabbanan. That sounds like the machlokes that we have in our Gemara about the second case of our Mishnah, where somebody takes an axe and they hit a tree. So hitting the axe is action number one. The wood coming off and killing someone's action number two. What was the case that Rav Papa just described? Throwing something at a tree is action number one, and the dates falling and killing someone's action number two. So the Gemara says, Shita, that comparison is obvious. I don't need you for that. That's obvious. Says the Gemara, that's not true. We're learning a chiddush with Rav Papa. Ma'udetema kekoach kocho dami kamash malan. Says the Gemara, you might have thought that when I hit the tree with the axe, and then subsequently wood comes off and kills someone, or when I throw a rock at a tree and subsequently dates fall and kill someone, you might have thought that was koach kocho, doubly removed from me. I only did action number one, but I didn't really mean for action number two. So says the Gemara, Kamash Malon, that the same exact machlokes applies. We don't call that koach kocho. That's just considered kocho. So then the Gemara asks the obvious question: Ela koach kocho the Rebbe hechi mishkach hasla. Says the Gemara, well then according to Rebbe, what is koach kocho? Remember that Rebbe held in the case where I take an axe and hit a tree and a piece of wood goes off and kills someone, that I go to galus for that because it's kocho. But then where would Rebbe say is koach kocho? Because it really is indirect. I hit the tree and the wood flew off to the side and killed someone. Rebbe says that's kocho. That's not koach kocho. That's not a double move. That's a single move. So says the Gemara, Ela koach kocho the Rebbe hechi mishkach hasla. So says the Gemara, kegon the pisa. He throws a piece of wood, umachye legarma, and it hits a branch. Ba'azil garma, and then the branch bounces back, umachye lechabasa, and that then hits a cluster of dates. Ba'atar tamre, ba'azil tamre v'katal. He says it needs to be what we would have called 3 steps. Rebbe only calls 2. So this is the difference for Rebbe. According to Rebbe, when I throw something at a tree and something then falls, that's all one action. Even though I was throwing it at the trunk of the tree and the trunk vibrated and then the dates fell and killed. So what then is koach kocho? Where a double thing, right? I did one and then another thing happened, which was not my intention. And that's such a low level of culpability that I won't even go to Gullus. So that's the case that the Gemara paints here. I throw a rock at a branch, the branch bends back, and then the branch bends forward beyond its normal place and hits dates, and then the dates fall and kills. Then you're patur from Gullus, according to Rebbe. That's what he holds is koach kocho, that would be patur. That brings us to a new Mishnah about 10 lines down on Daf Ches Amud Aleph. Let's continue learning through this Daf. Azorik Evan Rishus Harabim V'Harag Harei Gola. If somebody throws a rock into a public domain and he kills someone by accident, you get to go to Galus for that. We're going to discuss this in detail in the Gemara. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, Im Michashe Yotzesah Evan Miyado. If at the time of the release, so I'm holding a rock, here's my item, I take this and I throw it. If at the moment it leaves my hand, right, it lets go of my hand, at that time, only after that time, Hotzi hala es rosha v'kibla. So let's say there's a person and he's hiding. Here's my person and he's hiding down here. And I throw something. And had I thrown it and he not sat up, no problem, I wouldn't have hit him. I threw it. While it's in the air, the person pokes his head up and I kill him. That's the case of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. So our Mishnah says, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Omer, if after I release the rock, it's in the air now, then Hotzi hala es rosha v'kibla harei pater. I don't go to Gullus in that case. Because even had I aimed for that spot, nobody was there when I released the item from my hand. That's what the Gemara says. Let's say that I throw the rock into my own field and it kills someone. Well, then it really depends. If the nizak is a house guest, it's a regular person, it's an employee, it's someone who's regularly there and has permission to be there. So then I had a responsibility to be more careful. And then gola, then I would go to gulas. V'im lav. But if the nizak who was killed in my property did not have permission to be in my property, then my level of culpability is very low. And even though I've done something that was somewhat careless, but it doesn't reach the level of shogeg that would require me to go to galus v'im lav eino gola. And why is this the case? Shene'emar, because the pasuk says, "V'asher yavo esrei ehu vayar," that the friend will go into the forest. What does this mean? And the Mishnah gives a drasha that we saw just the other day. What's the drasha that we learn from this pasuk that teaches us that I'm only going to have a level of culpability for galus if the nizak, the person who gets injured, is allowed to be there? Maha ya'ar rishus nizak ulamazik likanes lasham. Just like a forest, it's a public place. Anyone's allowed to be there. And because anyone is allowed to be there, I need to be more careful. Then I'll go to galus if I kill that person by accident. But if it's my personal property and you have no right to be there, and I threw a rock into my backyard and you shouldn't have been there and you died, that's not on me. That's not my fault. Get out of my backyard. I can throw rocks in my backyard if I want. And I don't have to look before I do that. I only have to look for the people who are allowed to be there. So, Ladurma, in my backyard, let's say I wanted to go throw a rock. At my dining room table where I'm sitting right now, my whole family's sitting there, and nobody else walks into my house. I don't even have to look halachically. I can go into the backyard, throw as many rocks, shoot as many arrows as I want. Can't leave my yard, but everything in my yard. Why? Because no one should be in my yard. And if you're in my yard when you shouldn't have been, that's not my problem. That's your problem. Then the Gemara says in the name of Abba Shaul, we're just about halfway down, toward the end of the Mishnah that we started on Ches Amud Aleph. Abba Shaul Omer, Macha Tavas Eitzim Rishus, just like cutting down trees is a Rishus, Af Kol Rishus, so too with any case of Rishus, that's when we'll have Gullus. However, Yotza, what are the following cases where we won't have galus? So says the Gemara, Yotza ha'av ha'makes beno. That excludes a case where a father is hitting his child for the sake of chinuch purposes, not for the sake of abuse. V'harav harodes talmid. Then a rebbe who's also hitting a talmid. V'shliach bezdin, a shliach bezdin whose job it is to give malkos. You see, these people who have some halachic footing in what they're doing, if they kill by accident, they don't go to galus. That's the din of Abba Shaul, that only when there is rishus, when the scenario is not a requirement, but it's an optional scenario. I like throwing rocks in my backyard. There's no mitzvah to throw rocks. However, a person who's a rebbe who's rodes talmid of these things, we don't do them anymore. It's really not our path. certainly in the modern era. But back in the day, where let's say hitting a child in a constructive way, that was considered permissible and even praiseworthy. So in that case, if the father would accidentally kill the child, if the rabbi would accidentally kill the talmid, or if the shliach bezdin giving malchus would accidentally the kill the victim, so then in those cases there was no galus. Let's first open our Gemara talking about the first case of the Mishnah. If I throw a rock into a public domain, azorik evan the Rishus Harabim, then I go to galus. Asks the Gemara, the Rishus Harabim, mezidhu, what are you doing? You can't throw a rock into a public domain. That's not a case where you'd go to galus. That's a case where you'd get executed for being a murderer. So what does the Mishnah mean? So Amar of Shmuel bar Yitzchak, Besoseres Koslo, says the Gemara, we're talking about a case where I break my wall from my private property and it falls into public property. Says the Gemara, why would that be a case of galus either? After all, iboy leili iyune. You should have looked. You can't just knock down a wall. You have to look on the other side, put up some orange cones and some construction tape, put up a fence. But you can't just knock your wall down in a public domain. You wouldn't be going to galus for that. Again, you're a murderer. Says the Gemara, Besoseres kosla balayla. The Gemara says you're 100% right. What is the case where there is less culpability than mazid, but still enough to go into galus? The Gemara says that I did it at night. It says the Gemara, balayla nami ibai leidi iyune, last of the short lines. But even at night, you got to pay attention. You got to pay attention even at night when you knocked on your wall. So says the Gemara, Besoseres koslo le'ashba. Says the Gemara, I'm knocking down my wall into an area that really is where garbage goes. And that's a case where it's not quite a mazid, but it's enough that it's a shogeg that would require of me to go to galus. Says the Gemara, let's analyze your answer. You want to say that the case that the Mishnah was talking about of Hazorik Eben or Rishus Harabim was when someone was breaking down their wall and it falls into a Rishus Harabim? Okay, into a garbage heap? Let's see. Hi Ashba Hechidami. What is the garbage pit? If there are still regular people walking there, then posheahu, then you're just negligent and you deserve to be put into court as a murderer. You're not going into galus. And and if people never walk there, ever, so then anusu, then you're putter. But again, what's that middle of the road? Then we're trying to thread the needle. What's the case of Rishus Harabim where I throw something into Rishus Harabim and I'm not all the way to the extreme of murderer? I'm also not an ones. It says the Gemara, Amar Papa, Lo tzricha elo la'ashba ha'asuya lipanos babelayla. It's a place where people often go to the bathroom at night, but ve'ein asuya lipanos ba bayom. But most people would never go to the bathroom there during the day, too much sunlight. So it's a kind of place where there's privacy at night, and they didn't have indoor plumbing like we do. What a gift. They didn't have indoor plumbing like we do. So they'd go to the bathroom at particular locations that were convenient. So at night they went to this place because they had privacy. But during the day, most people would not go. However, v'ika de mikra v'yosef. But there are some people who still go to the bathroom during the day. So says the Gemara, if that's true, then you're poshea. Poshea lo have, says the Gemara, Poshea lo have, you're not a Poshea, excuse me. De'ha'ena asuli panos bavayom. If you knock down your house during the day, most people don't go there. And ones name lo have, de'ha'ika de mikri v'yasiv. There still are some people who do in fact go there, go to the bathroom. So you're kind of in the middle. It's a place that is uncommonly traveled. So that's really what the answer is of our Gemara. But let's just summarize. The first din of our Mishnah was that if someone throws a rock into Rishus Harabim, they go into galus. And Rav Papa explains that the case is where I knock down a wall in a space where most people don't use that space during the day to go to the bathroom. So today, I knocked down my wall. Unfortunately, someone was there and they were killed. So I'm not a pure mazid and I'm not a pure ones. In such a case, I end up going into galus. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer were 5 lines into the wide lines, and the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis have taught us in a brisa. The pasuk says, Umatzah, and let's learn the pasuk inside so that we have some context, because we're going to be dealing with this word over the next many lines. The pasuk on the side says, Dvarim Yud Tes, Ve'asher yavo esre'ehu vaya'ar, that his friend was in the forest, lachtov eitzim, to cut wood. V'nidcha yado v'garz and lichrosa eitz, and he picks up an axe. V'noshal habarzel min ha'eitz umatza esre'ehu v'mes. And the axe head, again, we saw this machlokes Rebbe in the Chachamim as to what the pasuk means. Let's just translate kipshuta like the Rabbanan do. The axe head falls off and kills somebody. Look at the language here. Umatza esre'ehu v'mes. It finds a person The axe head finds a person and kills them. What's the rest of the pasuk? Hu yanus el achas he'arim ha'ele v'chai. So then this person has to go to an Ir Mikvat. He has to escape to one of these cities. So let's look in our Gemara now. Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov taught us in our Mishnah that if a person's head, let's say the axe head falls off and it's flying here, and then the last second your head pops up over here, and then I hit you. So then the Gemara says that you're patur in that case. At least the Gemara, the Mishnah says that in the name of Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov. So let's see why. Tanu Rabbanan, when the pasuk says umatza that the axe head found the person's head, it's prat lamamsias atzmo. It excludes, meaning you don't have to go to galus if after I release the axe head from the handle, then you walk into the line, the trajectory of that axe head, then you're going to be pater. Mikan Amar Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov. This brisa is a perfect corollary to our Mishnah, because that was Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov in our Mishnah. Imi sheyatzasa eben miyado hotzi halas rosho bekibla pater. Says the Gemara that if I, after the release of the axe head, so I know it's going to this particular trajectory, but you weren't in that path when it started. So says the Gemara, if all of a sudden you take one step over and you're in the path and then you're pater. That's where he gets the din from. It's from the Chumash, the word umatzah. Says the Gemara, this is problematic. How did we define the word umatzah? Umatzah means that you were already there, and then that's when you're a shogeg. When are you not a shogeg? Prat lamamsi. If you weren't there and then you showed up. So the way we understand our pasuk is that the word matzah means you're already there, and we therefore exclude someone who wasn't there but moved there. So says the Gemara, Lememra, does this imply the matzah me'ikara mashma, that the word matzah, when the Torah uses the word matzah, it means that you were already there? I'll give you a raya brura, says the Gemara, that we do not have that understanding of the word matzah in another pasuk. Uraminhi, we have another pasuk that's found in Vayikra. The pasuk says, "V'ish kilo yihyelo goel v'hisiga yado umatzah k'dei geulaso." So as some background, what the Torah is speaking about over there is what's called a stei achuzah. A stei achuzah is an ancestral land, one that a child got from his father and his father got from his father, going all the way back to the Chalukah of Yehoshua, when Eretz Yisrael was divvied up per the parameters within the Chumash. And the halacha is that if I have no choice but to sell my ancestral land because I'm pressed for cash, I sell my land, there is a period of time and a set of halachos that govern, allowing me to take my land back if I then find money. So let's say I needed $1,000,000 and my stei achuzah is worth $1,000,000. I sell it to you for $1,000,000. And then a day later, I hit the lottery jackpot, and now I have plenty of millions of dollars. Then I can come to you halachically. Again, all this is based on the pasuk that we just read. And I can pay you back the million that you paid me for the land, and I get my stei achuzah, my ancestral land, I get that back. So what does the pasuk mean there? Umatzah, prat lematsui. What this means is that it's only if you find money, but not if you already have money. And here, the word matzah is being used in the opposite way that it was used in Dvarim. In Dvarim, the Gemara says, based on the pasuk, that if I was v'noshal habarzel min ha'etz umatzah esra'ehu v'mes, the head of the axe falls off, and you were there in the trajectory, then I go into galus, because matzah means that you were there. But here by stei achuzah, matzah means I didn't have the money, and then only later did I find the money. And look at this drasha. Prat lematzui, shelo yimkor berachok v'yigol bekarov. You can't keep property over there when you're selling a stei achuzah and use that. No. If you already had that money, if you had money in other places before you sold your stei achuzah, you don't get it back. And similarly, you also can't sell a better property over a worse property, or vice versa. Any cash you have on hand when you get rid of your stei achuzah invalidates your capacity to recollect your stei achuzah. You're done. So therefore, umatzah in our case means that you didn't have the item present. So the word matzah is exact opposites. By our case, umatzah means that you were already sitting where the axe was heading. Matzah by stei achuzah means you didn't have the money and you had to find it. Totally opposite implications of what the word matzah means. So beautiful question of the Gemara. The Gemara responds 2/3 of the way down and says, Amar Rava, hacha me'inyana dekra, v'hasa me'inyana dekra. As we would say in our parlance, you got to look at the context. The word matzah can be used in various ways, but there's no reason to use it in the same exact way in every single context. And here is how the Gemara explains that case. We said in the name of Rava, Hacha me'in yana dekra, v'hasa me'in yana dekra. Hasa me'in yana dekra, umatza dumya de v'hisiga yado. That when it comes to the case of steachuza, the pasuk that we're talking about has to be like hisiga yado. Ma hisiga yado mehashta. I just got it right now. I just got new money right now. Then at matzanami mehashta pashat. That in that case of steachuza, the word matzah means that you found it at that time. It wasn't there before. Pashat. And hacha, in our case that we're discussing by our Mishnah of Galus, of Enoshal Habarzel Mina 8. So there, hacha meinyana dekra as well. Umatza dumya de ya'ar. The word matzah in the pasuk that we've been discussing has to be similar to that of a forest. Ma ya'ar midi de isei meikar. The trees have been there for decades. Af umatza nami midi de isei meikar. Now, this discussion of whether or not the word matzah means already there or matzah means you find something new doesn't change our Gemara. It doesn't change our conclusions. We already understand the din that if a person, in the case of Galus, was already there, present where the trajectory of the axe head would land, that's when I go to Galus. And if you weren't there, but you walked into the line of fire, then I'm putter from Galus. Level of culpability is too low. But the Gemara did want to determine the consistency of the use of the word matzah. Let's continue with the next sugya. We're at the 2 dots, 3/4 of the way down. About 12 lines or so from the bottom of the page on Chesed Aleph. The Gemara says that if a person throws a stone, let's analyze. Amar leha hume rabbanan leRava. Somebody said to Rava, "B'mai demechatavas etim dirishus." Who says in our Mishnah that we were discussing a case of cutting wood that was a rishus? Dilma mechatavas etim de sukkah. Maybe you're cutting down wood to be part of your sukkah, or mechatavas etim de ma'aracha, or you're cutting wood for the sake of the pyre that we would use for the Makom HaMikdash. And says the Gemara, "V'afilu hachi amar Rachmana ligli." Perhaps we should say that we're not only talking about cases of rishus, we're even saying that if you're going to cut down wood for the sake of a mitzvah and you cause a death, you're going to be going to galus as well. Says the Gemara, no. Amar le. Rava says back to these rabbis who came over to him, Kevan di matzah chatu. That's not true, because if I went in the forest to find bamboo from my sukkah and I found the wood already cut, lav mitzvah. There's no mitzvah. There's no mitzvah to cut schach. The mitzvah just is that if you have to have schach, if it's attached, you have to cut it. But if I find the perfect bamboo that somebody else cut for other purposes, it's mine. Good to go. Ashtanami lav mitzvah. That's not cutting for a mitzvah. Cutting for a mitzvah it's an unrelated. So therefore, there would be galus in all those cases, according to Rava. Eisve Ravina the Rava. Ravina says to Rava, hold on 1 second. Yatza ha'av ha'makes beno v'harav ha'rodes talmid v'shleach bezdin. We had said on the previous Amud that these are 3 examples of people who will accidentally kill, but they'll never get galus. We have a father who's rearing his son. We have a Rebbe who's rearing a Talmud. And we have a Shleach Bezdin who killed, but that wasn't his goal. His job was to give Makkos, but the person unfortunately died. So Lema, perhaps we should say, just like you, Rava, wanted to say, Kevan di'ilu gamir, if the child was learned and he was doing great, lav mitzvah, hashtanami, lav mitzvah. Maybe we should say that the father hitting his son is also going to be chayiv in galus, because if the son's doing well, then the father shouldn't need to hit him. So says the Gemara, Hasa by the parenting, afal gav de gomir mitzvah. Even if it's the case that the child is erlich and he's on the right path, the father should parent with a stern hand, and he should still rear his son, again, in some way physically. How do we know this to be true? The pasuk says in Mishlei, Yaser bincha v'nicheka, that you should chastise your son and make sure that you're guiding him. And then down the road, when you parent in this way, your children will yield wonders for you, will yield great enjoyment, great nachas for you. So basically, the point is that there's still value in a parent rearing his child in this way, even if the child is on the right path. Rava looks in the mirror. He's like, I'm not really sure I like the answer I gave you. Lav milsi damri. I'm going to give you a better answer. Va'asher yavoes re'ehu bayar. What does it mean, va'asher? And if someone were to go into the forest, di boy ayil, v'i boy lo ayil. If you want to go into the forest, you can, and if you don't, you won't. V'isal kadaitach mitzvah misagya delo ayil. If you want to say that it's a mitzvah to be chotev eitzim, I mean, how could it be then that you can't go? Why would the Torah use the word va'asher? Va'asher means if you go. It says the Gemara, Amalei Rav Ada bar Ava l'Rava, kol heicha dichsiv asher di'i boihu. That's not the right way to learn the word asher. That would mean that only if, and I'll give you a raya, says the Gemara, that the word asher is used in another context where that's not true. Because after all, Elameata, the pasuk says, "V'isha asher yitma," a person gets tamei v'lo yischata, and he doesn't purify himself. Talking about the mechatas. Iboy mitma, iboy lo mitma. It says asher yitma. It's optional to become Tamei Pasha. That's not true. Mace mitzvah, de lo sagi, de lo mitama. Everyone's going to say that you have no choice but to get Tamei in that case. Hachanami de pater. If he walks into the mikdash because of the tomb of the mace mitzvah, is going to be pater? Absolutely not. So I'm showing you, Rava, that the word asher doesn't mean what you think it means. It says the Gemara, shiny hasam. The case of mace mitzvah is a little bit different. To Amar Kro, turning to the top of Daf Chesed Beis, Tamei Yihyeh, that a person will become Tamei Mikol Makom. So the pasuk over there is different. So you can't bring a raya from there. And perhaps Rava's answer that the word Va'asher means Iboy, that if you want to go into the forest, is a good argument to teach us that that's a case where you would say that there's galus. Says the Gemara, wait. Rava, you want to answer that the pasuk of Tamei Yihyeh is coming to teach us that a person will become Tamei Mikol Makom by a mace mitzvah? That's not true. Because we have a brisa that uses that pasuk, Tamei Yihyeh. What does the pasuk teach me? The rabbos to include the following couple of people that I might not have thought were Tamei. The rabbos tvul yom. That's someone who's already gone to the mikvah, but he's waiting for Ha'erev Shemesh. He's gone through the whole process. He's waited, he's dunked, he's good to go, except for one thing: the sun hasn't set yet. So the Gemara says Tamei Yihyeh means that we add in a person who's a tvul yom, that if he goes to the Beis Hamikdash, he will be chayav the isra of going in Tamei. You're not allowed even as a tvul yom. And similarly, the pasuk says "Tumas obo," your tumah would be upon him. The rabbos mechusar kippurim. We know that there are four people in halacha that are referred to as mechusar kippurim. It's a zav, zava, yoledes, and metzora. These four people, they're otherwise doing great, except that they didn't bring their kippurim, they didn't bring their korbanos. So what about them? So that's what the drasha of Tumasobo teaches us, is that these people as well will be usher if they go into the Beis Hamikdash. They'll violate the isra of going into the Beis Hamikdash tamei. So you can't use that pasuk. So says the Gemara, Amar le, Rava says, no, ana may ode Tumaso ka'amina. I learned that out from another word. Now, we just had this whole back and forth in the Gemara over the last many lines that we were just discussing about the forest and the word asher, and then what about the tamei, and what about all that? So says the Gemara that ika demasni la aha. Some say that we were really talking about something else when we had this dialogue. The pasuk says becharishu vekatzir tishbos. With plowing and with harvesting, we have to rest during the seventh year, during the Shemitah cycle. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva Omer, these psukim cannot be taken in kipshutan. The pasuk that says that you're not allowed to plow and you're not allowed to harvest during Shemitah, we don't need that from here because we already learned it. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva Omer, we're 5 lines down on Chesed Beis. Eino tzarech le chorish shel shvis v'katzir shel shvis. I don't need the pasuk of chorish by shvis or katzir because shari kvar nemar sadecha lo sizra v'charmecha lo sizmor. You're not allowed to plant your field, and you're not allowed to prune your vineyard. Ella, what does Rabbi Akiva say is the use of these psukim? Ella afilu chorish shel erev shvis shenichnas l'shvis. You're not even allowed to plow on erev shvis going into shvis. And similarly, the katzir shel shvis yatza lemotzei shvis. He's broadening the isser to say that plowing and harvesting on the eve of the 7th year or on the motzei of the 7th year, that's also asur. In contrast, Rabbi Shmuel learns the psukim differently. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, no, ma charish rishus, av katzir rishus. Says the Gemara, when is it that we're going to have this isser of plowing and the isser of harvesting of the Shemitah? That's only true if it's something that's rishus, that's optional. Yatza ktsir ha'omer, the Korban Omer was brought halachically, was brought 2 days ago, historically, on the 16th of Nisan. This is our wheelhouse. This is what we're in right now. It's Sfira. So yesterday was our third day of the count. So that was based on the Hakrava Sa'omer. So that was on the 16th. The 16th was day one of the count. The 17th was day two. The 18th, which was this past day, Tuesday during the day, Monday night, Tuesday was the 18th. So the Gemara says that this korban, the Ksir HaOmer, Shehu Mitzvah. So there, seemingly, according to Bishma, there is no Isser of harvesting that on the 16th or for the sake of the 16th of Nisan, because that's for a mitzvah. And Amar Leha Hume Rabban on the Rava, they said to Rava, Mimai de Charisha de Rishus, that we're talking about a Charisha that's part of a Rishus. Dilma Charishas Omer de Mitzvah, Vefilachi Amarachmana Tishbos. Maybe, says the Gemara, what does Rabbi Shmuel mean? Maybe it means that it's even usher to cut during Shemitah cycle. It's usher to cut even for the Korban Omer. So says the Gemara, Amar Le, no. Kevan de imatza charush eno choresh, lav mitzvah. Let's say that I walk into the field during a Shemitah cycle, and I see that the barley for the Korban Omer is sitting there perfectly ready. All the pearls of barley are off the vines. They're all sitting there. Enough. I pick up. I have the perfect shiur. Good to go. So then says Rava, you don't have to do the ktira. The reason why we'd say you're not allowed to harvest the Korban Omer, according to Rabbi Shmuel, during Shemitah, is because the cutting is not the mitzvah. Just finding it is the mitzvah. And if you can find it off the vine, that's what you should do. So then we see our conversation. Eisve Ravina l'Rava. How can you say that? We said Yotza ha'ava Makkos benova Rava rode talmid v'shliach bezin. So we saw that those were cases where people were patur because they were involved in a mitzvah. But just like we said, if you find the barley for the Korban Omer off the vine, there's therefore obviously, says Rava in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, no mitzvah to do the actual cutting and ktira, the harvesting of the barley. So ve'amai, why then would we say that these three cases of the father, the Rebbe, and the Shliach Bezin, why would they be pater? Lema kevan de ilu gomer lav mitzvah, hashtanami lav mitzvah. We should say that a father who's rearing his son in this particular way, he should be pater because his son's already a tzaddik of a kid. And Hasam afal gav the gomer nami mitzvah ka'abit, says the Gemara, no, like we saw, and that's where what the Gemara means, that the back and forth banter that we had on the bottom of Chesed Aleph wasn't talking about that case. It was talking about this case of Charesh v'Katzir. And says the Gemara that Rava responds that the reason why the father would still be pater from Galus, and similarly, why we see that there is no mitzvah to actually harvest the barley is because in this case, there's still a mitzvah to take care of the son. So the father is going to be pater from Galus, but there's still an isser for the Ketzira. There's still an isser. And says the Gemara, where do we see this from? Dichsiv, the pasuk from Mishlei, Yaser bincha v'nicheka. Hadar Amar Rava, like we saw before, because again, we're just repeating the conversation in another context, now in the context of Charesh v'Katzir. Says the Gemara, Hadar Amar Rava, Lav milsehita amri. Let me give you a bit of a better answer. I don't like my answer. Ksira dumya de charisha. We're talking about cutting this similar to choresh. Ma charisha, masa charush eno choresh. Just like by plowing, if it's already found plowed, no need for me to plow. Ksira nami, the same exact thing is true by ksira. Visal kadaitach mitzvah. Matzah kotzer eno kotzer mitzvah lixor lahavi. If you find it cut already, there's no need to be doing any of the cutting. That's what the Gemara says. That brings us to a new Mishnah. We'll just learn about 6 more lines and then we'll stop. Says the Gemara, Ha'ab, the father, Gole al Yedei Haben, a father who accidentally kills a son, will end up going to Galus. The reverse is also true. Haben Gole al Yedei Ha'ab. Says the Gemara, Kol Golan al Yedei Yisrael. Everyone will go to Galus for a Jew. Yisrael Golan al Yedei, and a Jew will go to Galus for everyone, Chutz mi ger Toshab, except for a ger Toshab. In this context, and in many contexts, a ger toshav is a goy who keeps the Sheva mitzvos b'nei Noach. So the Gemara says that that would be an exception to the rule of a Jew and a ger toshav. The ger toshav eino gola ela al yedei ger toshav. The only time a ger toshav would ever go into galus is if he accidentally killed another ger toshav. The Gemara opens with a quick question: Ha'av gola al yedei haben va'amris yotza ha'av hamakes beno the gomir. Amris afal gab the gomer mitzvah ka'avid. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. How could you say any of this? The father's pater if he kills his son by accident. Says the Gemara, it wasn't for Torah that he was hitting him. It was b'shulya denagri. It was an apprenticeship. He was teaching him a trade. Says the Gemara, shulya denagri chiyusehi. A father's obligated to teach his son a trade, send him to school, and make sure that he knows what skills he needs to get his job done. Says the Gemara, the Gomirim Nusachrisi, you're right, but if he had another job, then there's no reason why he needed this job. So in that case, and only in that case, a father would go to Galus on behalf of the damage that he caused by accidentally killing his son. We'll have to stop right here since it's 9:30. Wishing you all a beautiful night.